Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
This is the Daily History Chronicle, where we explore the moments that shaped our world and discover why they still matter today. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On February 9th, 1950, in the colonnade room of the McClure Hotel in Wheeling, West Virginia, a junior senator from Wisconsin stood before 275 members of the Ohio County Republican Women's Club. He was holding a piece of paper, and he was about to launch something that would destroy thousands of lives, poison in American politics for a generation, and give us a word we still use today: McCarthyism. I have here in my hand, Joseph McCarthy told that dinner crowd, a list of 205, a list of names that were made known to the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party, and who nevertheless are still working and shaping policy in the State Department. He had no such list. He would never produce such a list. And it wouldn't matter. Within days, McCarthy would become the most feared man in America. What fascinates me about this moment is how unremarkable it seemed at the time. A local lawyer who attended the speech later recalled that the accusation did not cause a ripple in the room. McCarthy's talk was described as intimate, homey, punctuated at times with humor. The women finished their Lincoln Day dinner. They went home, and by the next morning, everything had changed. Let me build the clock for you. In early 1950, America was afraid. Not the abstract fear we talk about in history books, real, gut-level fear. China had fallen to communism just months earlier, and 400 million people were now under Mao's control. The Soviets had detonated their first atomic bomb the previous August, years ahead of what American intelligence predicted. The comfortable American monopoly on nuclear weapons had vanished overnight. In January, a State Department official named Alger Hiss had been convicted of perjury in connection with Soviet espionage charges. Just weeks before McCarthy's speech, Klaus Fuchs confessed to passing atomic secrets to the Russians. The odds, as McCarthy would tell that Wheeling crowd, had shifted from 9-1 in America's favor to 8-5 against. That wasn't quite accurate, but it captured something real about the national mood. And Joseph McCarthy? He was a problem looking for an issue. McCarthy had arrived in the Senate in 1947 after defeating the legendary Robert La Follette Jr. in the Wisconsin Republican primary, partly with help from Communist Party members who despised La Follette's anti-communism. The irony would be rich if it weren't so dark. McCarthy won that campaign by falsely accusing La Follette of war profiteering, even though McCarthy himself had made $42,000 in the stock market during the war, a sum equal to more than $700,000 today. He'd also fabricated his military record, claiming heroic exploits as Tail Gunner Joe, when his actual combat experience consisted of shooting at coconut trees. For 3 years in the Senate, McCarthy had bounced from issue to issue, never finding traction. He'd lobbied to reduce the sentences of Nazi SS officers convicted of the Malmedy massacre. He'd fought against sugar price controls while accepting a $20,000 loan from a Pepsi bottling executive, earning the nickname the Pepsi-Cola Kid. A 1950 poll of the Washington Press Corps named him the worst U.S. senator currently in office. He needed something. That night in Wheeling, he found it. Here's what the evidence tells us about what actually happened in that ballroom. McCarthy had flown into Wheeling that evening with a prepared speech about housing policy. Former Senator Francis Love met him at the airport with Congressman Tom Sweeney. Someone, probably Love, suggested he talk about communism instead. It was a Lincoln Day celebration, after all. Red baiting played well with Republican crowds. The speech McCarthy delivered borrowed heavily from remarks Richard Nixon had given days earlier. The numbers he cited came from a 1946 letter from Secretary of State James Burns about employees who'd had recommendation against permanent employment, most of whom had already been cleared or left the State Department by 1950. McCarthy took outdated information, inflated it, and transformed it into an accusation of active treason. The next day's Wheeling Intelligencer ran the story. Reporter Frank Desmond later admitted to Congress that he wrote his account from McCarthy's prepared remarks, not the actual speech. Nobody recorded what McCarthy actually said. The number 205 appeared in Desmond's story, but McCarthy himself, in a telegram to President Truman 2 days later, claimed he'd said 57. On the Senate floor, 11 days after Wheeling, he cited 81. The numbers kept changing because there were no numbers. There was only the accusation. I find myself thinking about what happened next. The State Department demanded McCarthy make his names public. He refused. The Senate convened the Tidings Committee to investigate. McCarthy produced no evidence. The committee's final report called his charges a fraud and a hoax. Republicans voted unanimously against accepting the report, and McCarthy's approval rating soared. Within weeks, Washington Post cartoonist Herbert Bloch coined the term McCarthyism. It was meant as an insult. McCarthy embraced it. McCarthyism is Americanism with its sleeves rolled, he declared. He published a book titled McCarthyism, The Fight for America. For the next 4 years, McCarthy wielded the weapon he discovered in Wheeling. Accusation without evidence. The charge alone was the punishment. By the time anyone investigated, the damage was done. He attacked the State Department. He attacked the Army. He attacked General George Marshall, the architect of the Marshall Plan, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, accusing him of being part of a conspiracy so immense and an infamy so black as to dwarf any previous venture in the history of man. Marshall, a man who had served as Army Chief of Staff, Secretary of State, and Secretary of Defense. A man Dwight Eisenhower called his mentor. The human cost is staggering. Historians estimate that roughly 10,000 Americans lost their jobs during the McCarthy era, and that's a conservative count. More than 300 actors, writers, and directors were blacklisted in Hollywood alone. Nearly 3,000 maritime workers, longshoremen, sailors, were driven from their jobs by a port security program that kept accusers anonymous and evidence secret. Teachers were fired. Professors lost their tenure. Union organizers were investigated and hounded from their positions. The stigma spread like contagion. A Stanford study found that actors who had merely worked with someone later blacklisted saw their employment drop by 13%. Guilty by association with the guilty by accusation. Oscar winners got some protection. Everyone else was expendable. Some people killed themselves. Philip Loeb, who played the warm Jewish patriarch in the Goldbergs television series, was blacklisted after being named in Red Channels, an anti-communist publication. Unable to find work, increasingly desperate, he committed suicide in 1955. Lawyer Bartley Crum, who defended members of the Hollywood Ten, was subjected to FBI surveillance, phone taps, and systematic harassment until he too took his own life in 1959. Books were burned, not metaphorically, actually burned. When McCarthy's chief counsel, Roy Cohn, toured State Department libraries overseas looking for subversive material, the State Department panicked and ordered the removal of works by anyone McCarthy deemed suspicious. Some librarians burned the forbidden books rather than risk being associated with them. President Eisenhower, disgusted, finally spoke out. Don't join the book burners. Don't be afraid to go in your library and read every book. The list of banned authors included the editor of the selected works of Thomas Jefferson. McCarthy never found a single communist in the United States government, not one. His investigations produced 0 convictions for espionage, 0 evidence of active Soviet infiltration in the agencies he targeted. What he produced instead was fear. Think about what it meant to live under that fear. You couldn't join the wrong organization. You couldn't sign the wrong petition. You couldn't be seen with the wrong people. Your neighbor could denounce you. Your ex-spouse could denounce you. The accusation alone meant investigation, and investigation meant suspicion, and suspicion meant unemployment. Even if you were cleared, you were tainted. McCarthy also ran what historians call the Lavender Scare alongside the Red Scare, a parallel persecution of suspected homosexuals in government. The logic, if you can call it that, was that gay employees could be blackmailed into betraying secrets. The result was thousands more ruined careers. By 1954, the government was dismissing suspected homosexuals at 12 times the rate it had before McCarthy's rise. Here's what troubles me about this story. McCarthy's downfall, when it came, had nothing to do with the people he destroyed. In 1954, he made the mistake of attacking the United States Army, accusing it of coddling communists. The televised Army-McCarthy hearings let Americans see him unfiltered for the first time. The bullying, the interruptions, the sneering. For 36 days, an estimated 20 million viewers watched McCarthy badger witnesses, invent accusations on the spot, and demonstrate the casual cruelty that had always been there but had rarely been visible. Army counsel Joseph Welch delivered the famous rebuke, "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" The gallery erupted in applause. It was the first time anyone had publicly called McCarthy what he was. The Senate censured McCarthy that December by a vote of 67 to 22. Democrats voted unanimously for censure. Republicans split evenly. His popularity collapsed. The colleagues who had once feared him now avoided him entirely. His speeches were delivered to near-empty chambers. McCarthy drank heavily. He was also addicted to morphine, secretly supplied by Harry Anslinger, head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, who feared the scandal of exposing a senator. When McCarthy threatened Anslinger with retaliation if the secret came out, Anslinger kept supplying the drugs anyway, all the way to the end. McCarthy died in 1957 at age 48, officially of hepatitis, actually of alcoholism. More than 17,000 people filed through the church in Appleton, Wisconsin, to pay their respects. But the system he exploited didn't die with him. The blacklist continued for years. The fear lingered longer. And his chief counsel, a 27-year-old lawyer named Roy Cohn, went on to build a career as a New York power broker, carrying McCarthy's methods into a new era. In 1973, Roy Cohn was at Le Club, an exclusive Manhattan nightclub, when a young real estate developer asked his advice about a Justice Department lawsuit alleging racial discrimination in his family's apartment buildings. Cohn's response was pure McCarthy. Tell them to go to hell and fight the thing in court. That young developer was Donald Trump. Cohn became his lawyer, his mentor, his guide to the uses of accusation and counterattack. They spoke as often as 20 times a day. Cohn introduced Trump to media mogul Rupert Murdoch and political operative Roger Stone. "I hear Roy in the things he says quite clearly," Peter Fraser, Cohn's final partner, told the New York Times about Trump. "That bravado, and if you say it aggressively and loudly enough, it's the truth." That's the way Roy used to operate to a degree, and Donald was certainly his apprentice. Some observers argue that Roy Cohn created a president from beyond the grave. The philosopher Hannah Arendt, who studied the rise of totalitarianism, wrote that the ideal subject of authoritarian rule is not the convinced Nazi or the convinced communist, but people for whom the distinction between fact and fiction, true and false, no longer exists. That's what McCarthy discovered in Wheeling. He didn't need facts. He needed the accusation. The piece of paper in his hand didn't have to contain 205 names or 57 names or any names at all. The paper itself was irrelevant. What mattered was the gesture, the claim of secret knowledge, the promise of hidden enemies, the invitation to fear. I'm Richard Backus, and this is the Daily History Chronicle. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Until then, consider this. Why did an accusation with no evidence destroy so many lives? What made Americans so willing to believe? And 75 years later, have we learned anything at all? Because that's what February 9th, 1950 teaches us. Not just about communism or the Cold War, but about how easily fear can be manufactured, how willingly we surrender our principles when we're frightened, and how a man waving an empty piece of paper can change a nation. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, then please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, then please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.